Stop right there.
I don't understand. I was just coming from church.
They said I matched a suspect, David whispered, voice trembling as he clutched his Bible to his chest. I was just coming from church. The morning sunlight spilled softly over the quiet streets of Westbrook. It was Sunday, and the air carried the faint scent of baked bread, freshly mowed lawns, and the distant laughter of children playing. For David Thompson, it had been a peaceful service, the kind that filled his heart with hope and calm. But as he stepped out of St. Mark's Church, Bible under arm, the world shifted. A black SUV screeched to a halt in front of him, tires crunching on the gravel, doors flinging open with authority and precision. Officers jumped out, hands on holsters, their eyes sharp and scanning. "Sir, stop right there," one shouted. David froze, panic immediately tightening its grip around his chest. He raised his free hand instinctively. Step away from your vehicle. Hands visible," another officer barked. Confusion collided with fear. David's mind raced. Why? What happened? Did someone call? Was this a mistake? His voice caught in his throat as he tried to explain himself. I was at St. Mark's. I just finished service," he said, desperation creeping in. I didn't do anything." The officers didn't answer directly. They circled him, flashlight beams cutting across his face, reflecting off the pages of the Bible he clutched like a shield. David's heart pounded as he realized how powerless he was, how quickly a peaceful Sunday had turned into chaos. One officer spoke into a radio. "Suspect matches description. Detain him." David's knees buckled slightly. "Please, I'm innocent. I was just coming from church." His voice cracked, the words heavy with fear and disbelief. His hands shook violently, Bible pressed tightly against his chest, a symbol of both faith and fragility. The officers moved in closer, voices clipped, commands sharp and deliberate. David realized in that instant that survival depended not on explanations, not on truth, but on compliance. Every small motion mattered, every microsecond a potential danger. Neighbors peeked from their windows, some curious, some fearful. The street was normally calm on Sunday mornings, but today it had become a stage for suspicion, authority, and fear. David's mind flashed to his family, his wife, his 2 young children, safely inside, unaware of the nightmare unfolding just blocks away. "Hands behind your back," one officer commanded. David obeyed, heart hammering, every instinct screaming that he was innocent, yet powerless in the face of authority. The Bible slipped slightly from his grasp, but he caught it quickly, holding it tighter than ever. The officers cuffed him swiftly, efficiently, their movements a blur. David's protests fell into the cold morning air, unheard, dismissed. Tears began to burn at the corners of his eyes, not from pain, but from the raw humiliation and fear, the stark realization that the world did not see him as a man of faith, a neighbor, a father. They saw only a suspect. A neighbor whispered from their window, "Is that him?" David wanted to shout, to explain, to scream that he was innocent, that he had never broken the law, that he had only been coming from church. But his voice was swallowed by authority, drowned in the sharp commands of the officers, the flashing lights of their SUV, the cold efficiency of their task. As he was led to the vehicle, he glanced at the church in the distance, sun spilling over the stained glass windows. A place that had once given him peace, now felt distant, almost mocking. The calm of the morning had vanished, replaced by a weight he could not lift, a fear he would carry long after the cuffs were removed. "They said I matched a suspect," he whispered again, voice raw with emotion. "I was just coming from church." The words lingered, heavy, echoing through the street, capturing the tension, fear, and heartbreak of an innocent man caught in a system that saw guilt before humanity. David Thompson's hands were cuffed tightly behind his back, the metal biting slightly into his wrists. The morning sun glinted harshly off the handcuffs, a cold reminder that authority had claimed him, regardless of innocence. His chest heaved, every breath a sharp reminder of fear and disbelief. He had been coming from church, a place of peace, not a street corner filled with suspicion and flashing lights. "Sir, keep moving toward the vehicle," an officer commanded. David obeyed, each step deliberate, careful, calculated. His knees shook violently, not from weakness, but from the sheer panic that surged through him. He had never felt so powerless in his life. As he walked, neighbors peeked from windows, whispers floating down the street. Some pointed, some shook their heads, but none intervened. The world that had seemed familiar and safe only moments ago had transformed into something unrecognizable, a stage where he was both actor and prisoner, and the script was already written without his consent. David's eyes darted toward the church. The stained glass windows glowed softly, a silent witness to his ordeal. "They don't see me. They don't see who I am. They only see a description, a suspect." The thought twisted his stomach into knots. His faith, his life, His routine Sunday had all been reduced to a mistaken identity. One officer whispered into a radio, words clipped and mechanical, subject detained, running checks now. The efficiency of their voices, devoid of empathy, magnified the humiliation. David's mouth opened, wanting to protest, to insist that he was innocent, but no sound emerged. Fear had silenced him. The SUV doors swung open, black interiors ominous and uninviting. David was guided inside, the metal seats cold against his body. He pressed his Bible to his chest again, as if it could shield him from the scrutiny, the judgment, the invisible weight of authority pressing down. Inside, officers continued their questions, rapid fire, sharp. Where are you going? Where do you live? Why are you out alone? Each question felt like an accusation, each answer a test. I was just coming from church, David said, voice trembling. I didn't do anything. Silence followed. The officers conferred quietly, whispers of names, descriptions, and routines. David could feel every second stretching into an eternity. Each glance from an officer, each shift of weight, made his heart pound faster. He was trapped in a system that judged him on sight, a system that could not see his innocence. The cuffs tightened slightly as he shifted, the metal biting deeper, sweat beaded on his forehead. My children are home. My wife, she thinks I'm safe. The thought clawed at his chest. Fear, humiliation, and anger collided in his mind. He had done nothing wrong, yet here he was, powerless, reduced to a suspect in someone else's story. David's voice cracked as he muttered to himself, I just wanted to go to church. I just wanted to worship. The words were swallowed by the SUV's interior, unheard by anyone but himself. They echoed in his mind, a testament to the injustice of being seen as guilty for no reason. Minutes dragged. The officers ran background checks, typed into computers, conferred in hushed tones. David sat frozen, trying to steady his trembling hands and erratic breathing. The sunlight outside streamed through the tinted windows, highlighting the stark contrast between the calm Sunday morning and the chaos of his current reality. He thought of the congregation he had just left behind, the pastor's sermon, the hymns, the prayers. It all seemed distant now, almost cruelly serene in contrast to the fear and humiliation that surrounded him. David realized how fragile normalcy could be, how quickly a simple act, like walking from church to his car, could become a nightmare. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, one officer spoke. Checks are clear. You're free to go. David exhaled sharply, his body trembling with relief and lingering fear. He rose carefully, stretching stiff limbs, the cuffs removed with a mechanical click, but the psychological weight remained, a heavy, invisible burden pressing down. His Bible remained pressed to his chest, not just a symbol of faith, but a fragile shield against the memory of a morning that should have been peaceful. As he walked back toward the sidewalk, returning to the world that had seemed safe moments ago, David knew one thing with clarity: the terror of suspicion, of being judged and detained for nothing, would linger far longer than the cuffs or the officer's words. Even though the handcuffs were removed, David's body refused to relax. His wrists still throbbed, the lingering burn, a physical reminder of the morning's terror. The officers' voices, their commands, the glare of the flashlights, they all remained etched in his mind, replaying relentlessly like a broken record. He walked slowly back toward the church, Bible pressed tightly against his chest, as though it could shield him from the humiliation that clung to him. Neighbors who had watched the detainment whispered among themselves, some sympathetic, some merely curious. Each glance he caught felt like a reminder that the world had seen him, not as a man of faith, but as a suspect, a problem to be handled. David's hands shook violently as he fumbled with the door handle of his car. He wanted to cry, to scream, to collapse right there on the sidewalk, but pride, fear, and habit restrained him. The officer's efficiency had stripped him of more than freedom. It had stripped him of dignity, leaving him exposed and vulnerable in ways words could not fully capture. He thought of his congregation, still singing hymns inside the church, unaware that the man they trusted and respected had been reduced to a suspect in the eyes of authority. The dissonance gnawed at him, how a world that could recognize goodness within walls of faith could simultaneously see threat in an innocent man walking home. As he drove slowly down the street, sunlight cutting through the morning haze, David's mind replayed every detail of the encounter. The screech of the SUV tires, the officer's sharp commands, the cold metal of the handcuffs, the whispers of neighbors, it all combined into a surreal nightmare that refused to loosen its grip. Each memory carried a pang of humiliation, a reminder that innocence alone was not enough to shield someone from suspicion. He tried to steady his thoughts, focusing on his family. His wife and children were at home, blissfully unaware of the trauma he had endured in just a few minutes. The thought should have been comforting, but instead, it deepened the ache in his chest. What if something had gone wrong? What if this had ended differently? The questions offered no answers. only a lingering weight that pressed down on his shoulders. David's eyes filled with tears as he recalled the words that had trapped him in fear. Suspect matches description. Detain him. That single phrase had stripped him of autonomy, of dignity, of safety. The officers had not looked at him as a human being. They had seen only a possible criminal, a puzzle to be processed and discarded once cleared. At home, he sat at the kitchen table, Bible still in hand, trying to reconcile the warmth of Sunday morning with the cold, sharp reality of the streets. The juxtaposition felt unbearable. A place of peace had been contrasted with a moment of terror, so raw and abrupt that the lines between safety and threat had been erased entirely. He remembered the neighbors' eyes, some curious, some judgmental, some frightened. The street had seemed to watch him as much as he had been watched. The humiliation was public and private simultaneously, a dual weight that burrowed deep into his psyche. Even now, hours later, he could feel the echo of their gaze pressing against him, questioning him, doubting him, reminding him that the world did not see him as innocent until proven otherwise. It assumed the opposite. David's thoughts turned inward. He reflected on the fragility of life, the randomness of perception, and the way authority could impose terror in moments, crushing confidence, instilling fear, and leaving scars invisible to the eye. His faith, though unwavering, felt challenged in ways he had not anticipated. He wondered how many others, like him, had been reduced to suspects while simply existing, living ordinary lives, fulfilling ordinary routines. Finally, he whispered to himself, voice cracking, "I was just coming from church." The words were heavy, imbued with the pain of humiliation, disbelief, and sorrow. They hung in the air, a private lament but also a truth that encapsulated the morning's chaos. They were a reminder that innocence alone could not guarantee safety, that being right was irrelevant when fear and authority dictated reality. David pressed the Bible closer, tears slipping down his cheeks. The world outside his window moved on, unconcerned, while the memory of those few terrifying minutes would remain with him forever. He understood, in that quiet reflection, that survival had come at a price, not just fear, but a permanent reminder that the world could misjudge, misunderstand, and threaten anyone, even a man walking home from church. The officers finally stepped back, their radios quieting, their commands ending, and David felt the tense knot of fear in his chest loosen just slightly. The handcuffs were removed, and the morning sunlight felt warmer somehow, though the shadow of humiliation still pressed heavily upon him. He rubbed his wrists, the lingering sting of the metal, a stark reminder of the morning's ordeal. His Bible remained pressed to his chest, a fragile shield of comfort and faith, as though the pages could absorb the fear, the injustice, the lingering threat that had clung to him so persistently. David stepped carefully toward his car, scanning the street for signs of lingering judgment or threat. The neighbors were returning to their Sunday routines, their whispered conversations tapering off. Yet, in his mind, every glance, every muted expression, seemed amplified, echoing the moment when innocence had failed to protect him. Driving slowly down the quiet street, he reflected on how quickly normalcy could vanish. Moments ago, he had been walking home in peace, attending church as he always did, immersed in prayers and songs. Now the world seemed harsher, less predictable, and infinitely more dangerous. The ordinary had become extraordinary. Life had become a test of survival in a world quick to misjudge. He thought of his family at home, oblivious to the chaos he had endured. The thought was a bittersweet balm, comforting yet heavy with guilt. What if the morning had ended differently? What if a small misstep had escalated into disaster? The questions gnawed at him, their weight pressing into his chest, but no answers came. David's mind wandered back to the officer's words, the efficiency of their movements, the cold precision of the detainment. Suspect matches description. Detain him. That phrase had reduced him to nothing more than a potential threat, erasing identity, history, and humanity in a few clipped words. The humiliation was public, the fear private, a dual scar that would linger far longer than the physical evidence of cuffs and flashlights. Even as he entered his driveway and stepped inside, the safety of home did little to dissolve the tension. The adrenaline still coursed through his veins, his body rigid with residual fear. He laid the Bible on the table, its presence now both comforting and poignant, a silent witness to the ordeal that had unfolded on what should have been a peaceful Sunday morning. David sank into a chair, hands clasped tightly over the Bible, and tried to steady his racing thoughts. He remembered the morning vividly, the screech of tires, the officer's shouts, the metallic click of the cuffs, the piercing glare of flashlights, the whispers of neighbors, and realized that these images would remain with him indefinitely. The memory of being judged, detained, and scrutinized for something he had not done had left a permanent mark, and yet, amidst the fear, humiliation, and lingering trauma, a quiet ember of resilience persisted. He had survived. He had endured. Though stripped of dignity and autonomy for a fleeting, terrifying moment, he had returned home. That return, that fragile survival, was itself a testament to his strength. He whispered again, the words heavy with sorrow and disbelief. I was just coming from church. The repetition was both lamentation and affirmation, a reminder of vulnerability, innocence, and resilience. Even in a world quick to assume guilt, even under the weight of fear and authority, he had maintained his humanity. David knew the morning would haunt him, not just as memory, but as a lesson. He understood, painfully, that life could change in an instant, that perception often outweighed reality, and that survival sometimes demanded endurance, patience, and faith beyond reason. The streets of Westbrook might appear peaceful to outsiders, but for him, the ordinary act of walking from church had revealed the fragile boundary between safety and peril, trust and suspicion, humanity and judgment. By the time the sun reached its peak, David was still processing, still trembling slightly, but he carried with him a quiet determination. The morning had stripped him bare emotionally, but it had not destroyed him. He had lived. He had returned to his family, and though the memory would linger, so too would the resilience it had forged. Even after the officers had left, the fear remained, a quiet echo in David's chest that refused to fade. Every shadow, every sound outside, the distant hum of cars, the occasional bark of a dog, footsteps along the sidewalk, triggered a memory of the morning's chaos. Though free, he was not untouched. He sat at his kitchen table, Bible still pressed to his chest, hands trembling slightly. The humiliation and disbelief lingered like a shadow over the sunlight streaming through the window. David knew that the terror of being judged, detained, and misunderstood could never be erased completely. Survival had come at a cost far greater than cuffs or handshakes. It had left scars invisible to the eye, but heavy on the heart. He thought of the officers, their efficiency, their clipped commands, their lack of empathy. He thought of the neighbors' whispered curiosity, the street that had transformed from familiar to alien in minutes. And he thought of himself, a man who had only wanted to worship, to attend church, to live a peaceful Sunday morning. They said I matched a suspect, he whispered, voice cracking. I was just coming from church. The words hung in the quiet room, a testament to fear, innocence, and resilience. Though the trauma would linger, David also knew something else. He had survived. He had endured. And that, he realized, was both a burden and a quiet, stubborn victory.